lot of ways that depression, it's kind of like this dark cloud that just appears every morning and you just can't get rid of it. It's not that you're sad, it's just that you're sick. So I have people get rid of that first, go after the depression, at least moderate it and the anxiety so that we can get them to a stage where they're able to take health into their own hands.
Asa, so excited to have you here in the Conscious Investor podcast. I have one question to launch us to get us going, and that is, what do you do and how did you get started?
Yeah, so I was real sick as a kid, so that's kind of where I got started. Uh, I think a lot of people in the health sphere tend to go about getting into health because they feel they have to get into health. That I was definitely one of those people. Um, but suffice it to say, now what I do is functional health. I help people get to places where they need to be in their lives to make their lives just altogether more bountiful and much really worth living. It's hard to encapsulate it into words, because I'll work with couples, singular people. Across the board when it comes to like their relationship dynamics and how that translates to their endocrine system and their hormones onto their gastrointestinal health and all that. So, a bit of context though about me and my past. I was molested as a kid and I had the usual trauma that came from that. And I was relentless to try to figure out the answer. Like, why did that, why did it go that way? Or why did it translate in a weird way for me in my psychology? Why did I have to be depressed or anxious? And I didn't really get to the answers until I was 22. So this was after all my attempts to try to kill myself and everything. I was chronically anxious and everything. And I was really emaciated. I was sick all the time. And yeah, so I wanted to, fix my skin health. And because I'd failed in some relationships, and I thought it was the skin. It's kind of ridiculous. It was mostly my own psychology and my hormones, really. So anyway, I had this theory. I was like, oh, this chicken scratch in my skin, it's got to be caused by something. So I started deep diving alternative knowledge on it, and there are a lot of opinions online, and that's another reason why people will pay me is because there are a lot of opinions online for alternative health. And so I kind of helped them narrow it down what was going to be working right away and really quickly and for the long term. And I found that fungi can be connected to these skin issues. And so as theoretically, I was going through, I went through doctors' opinions, various natural doctors, other chiropractors were making opinions about it, and everyone had their different protocols and everything. So I went and deep dived the literature and found that something called grapefruit seed extract would be the most effective against and bioavailable against candida yeast, which is the one I was targeting in particular. I did have a pass with mold, but that's a different story. At this point, I was going after the yeast, and so when I did that, my chronic anxiety and my clinical depression just died, just gone. And it only took 2 weeks of that. And I encounter people in the health space now that just spend years trying to get that done, and I'm like, wow, well, sometimes it's just some fungus monster that just lives inside of us. But for others, it could be heavy metal toxicity, xenobiotics, like various chemicals in the atmosphere that we retain. These all contribute to bodily toxicity that can cause something like anxiety or depression through a myriad of biochemical reactions. So generally, after I figured that out, I just, my skin changed, everything changed for me. My health started to get so much better. I wouldn't say that it's perfect now, but it is so much more than it used to be. It's absolutely crazy to me. I don't get sick anymore. I didn't get sick during COVID. I just altogether do really well metabolically now, and I try to share that with people. And since for the last 5 years, I've made it professional. And yeah, so I don't just do like gut cleansing for people. I do we go after fungi, mold, parasites. We try to balance minerals, get heavy metals out of the body. Also to detoxify all the plastics that we retain throughout the day, or in the atmosphere, not just plastics, but other chemicals. They're called xenobiotics. But generally, yeah, that's more of my approach is root cause, getting at the guys that are disturbing the human system. I take the assumption that the body is constantly trying to rectify itself. It doesn't need to be fixed by people. And
Mm,
so I'm big on fasting because of that. I've made some huge headway in my life with by doing something called dry fasting. It's kind of controversial, but it's going without food and water. I'm actually hosting a group this weekend for it, where we'll basically go 3 whole days without food and water, and I guide them through the process and tell them how it works, and what kind of water they generate along the way, what kind of electrolytes they need to take beforehand and after, and all that. So dry fasting changed my life, and in a lot of ways. So really big on that, and all those alternative practices that are really functional and actually work are what I do. So merit-based stuff. So I keep my mind open. I, I very much so, because in the space out, everything out there, there's so many factors that can help you with your health, from exercise to meditation to breath work. Deep nose breathing is so big because it produces nitric oxide. It helps our white blood cells to keep our immunity high. And I thought all these things a while back were kind of useless, but I'm starting to see the science on it, and I'm starting to see my own experience on it. I'm like, wow, this is crazy. It actually works. And so I'm big on the red light sauna and near infrared sauna, and sauna niacin. um, yeah, so there's just so much in that space, but I like to narrow it down to priorities for people, the environmental to the diet to the lifestyle that we live and all that. So, but yeah, that's what I do. So long story short, I had a lot of problems, um, and I fixed uh, like the majority of them. I'm still trying to constantly fast to fix all of it, but I'm getting there. Yeah.
it's such a process, and like, oh my gosh, there's so much information there. That's why I launched the episodes with that question, because like, oh my gosh, so many questions in one. I want to just say I'm grateful for your willingness to openly speak about the trauma you experienced as a child. It's a very common trauma, which is just like heartbreaking. And when we have people who have healed, who can speak from a point of healing, that can it creates it just creates opportunity for other people to find that healing in their own life, and to say, this is possible for me too. Here's somebody else who's done it. So I'm sorry you've experienced that. And I'd like to also say I'm grateful that you've done the deep inner work and the physical work to, go beyond that, and to not let it be something that defines you. Um, I'd love to know. I love the fact that you go after the root cause when you were working with clients. It's so important. I am a firm believer in that also. Like, don't treat the symptoms. Like, why? Just keep asking why until you get down to like what the actual what is. When you are working with new clients, how is it like, what are the steps that you take clients through so that you know where to start, what their priorities are, and that I imagine is like the little, I'm opening like the little chest to like dive down Alice's rabbit hole or something, like, okay, let's go down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, actually, a lot of the time I end up trying to sell people more health, because and I'll get to the point as like why I'm bringing it up. People don't often know where they can be with their health and who they really are. A lot of people today, they're like, well, I only got sick one time a year. Uh, my skin is fine. I don't have joint pain. My teeth are great. My mental health is average. I'm not, I'm only taking Adderall, or, I'm not taking any antidepressants. I'm fine. Like a lot of people justify, that that's good health. And I like to push people to go for more. Um, for instance, with the concept of dry fasting, and that's one that I like to really do more often, for like progressing health permanently. There are guys I've worked with and guys that I'm friends with who are past the age of 45, who, or even women too. There's just not anecdotally as much evidence with women, but men, their test, and it's also likely because tracking optimal endocrine functioning is easier to do with men because a man's endocrine system is so much more simple than a woman's. It can. Oh, what happened?
Here, sorry, editors. Just yeah, check the mic real fast. It's
Oh, can
it's
you hear
rubbing
me?
against something. Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh,
It's just brushing
sorry.
against something. It's
Oh,
okay.
okay. Sorry about that.
Here, let's give them a little pause. It's okay.
Okay. So, yeah, generally with endocrine functioning, it can be really complicated with women. And so it can be harder to track down the evidence as far as like what progress they're making versus a man. A man, like, he can just go and get some blood work and it shows that his testosterone is over 700. Great job. If you're doing that over the age of 45, that's pretty good. And you're not taking TRT, that's great. A lot of men have to take exogenous hormones, exogenous meaning from outside. Um, but I like to help men to go further and help them acknowledge that and know that their body can actually produce more of its own testosterone supply if you enable it to. And so this can be moderated by their lifestyle and the relationships they have in their lives onto the things that they eat and the exercise that they do and the things that they do each day. So it's a really, really big factor. Um, so just overall, um, when I work with root cause oriented situations, I'm helping because a lot of people tend to, when they come to me, they're looking for something really simple, like I want to lose weight, or I would just like to be free of anxiety. I would just like to have better skin. I'd like to just be less angry around my wife, or I want to be less erratic around my husband. Things like that. People are looking for very simple things, and usually I'm trying to sell them as well. While we do those things, I'm trying to convince them that there is so much more there than just that. Like when you're working with me, there is so much more that can come from that. Like when you remove root causes from the body, your body starts to fix all kinds of things. It's not just that one thing. It's kind of like my story where I was going after a skin issue, and then all of a sudden my mental illness went out and it was gone. And I'm like, what the heck? So, I usually prepare people for the reality that there can be so much more on the other side of it's quite the surprise. And that they should very much push for it because it'll make their lives so much better overall. But yeah, so I generally, the way that I work people through it is, you know, I'll start by going after their goals, but I'll make it very clear to them that if they have any kind of anxiety or depression, that should be the first thing we always go after first. Because in a lot of ways, that depression, it's like this biological means of telling us, or it's kind of like this dark cloud that just appears every morning and you just can't get rid of it. It's not that you're sad, it's just that you're sick. And I yeah, so I have people get rid of that first. Go after the depression, at least moderate it, and the anxiety, so that we can get them to a stage where they're able to take health into their own hands.
That's powerful.
And
How can I
yeah, yeah, yeah,
interrupt here for a moment and just say how, because anxiety and depression is something that is, I mean, we I think conscious investor, you will agree, that is something that we just have seen a surge, an influx of people facing and battling and wrestling with that. What are some of the elements that you believe? Because let's face it, the media is going to say, oh my gosh, it's social media. So social media is, and they'll point the finger and blame other things. But what have you found and discovered working with your clients with, alleviating them of that anxiety and depression?
um, yeah. So are you saying like what they're expressing after they've been alleviated from it, or
Or kind of like what is it that helps them move beyond that? I guess I'll be cure or heals them, or right, like what
yeah,
takes them beyond where they are into the land
yeah.
of what I call freedom.
Yeah. Well, I always have to be careful of my terminology because I can never use the term heal and cure legally, but I can always
Yes.
say like, well, I'll tell you how to do all these things that you yourself can discover and be like, wow, I don't have anxiety anymore. So, but yeah, so when it comes to anxiety, it's a complex one. I made a really big post on it in my health groups, and because a lot of people are kind of confused about it, and I have two primary groups. I have my health only science and health focus group, and then I have my group that's focused on the endocrine system, uh, polarity principles and relationships, and how the science works on that. And I integrated both into one post talking about anxiety. So it's really, really complex. And a lot of women may feel that to them, because they're women, anxiety is going to be more of a thing for them than with men. But then a lot of people in general, like guys, get plenty of anxiety. But there's a factor there where men are less likely to get anxiety because in a lot of ways they can end up getting more proteins that end up getting more serotonin production going in their brain simply because of higher testosterone levels. And men tend to be more fearless, and this is probably a large part of that. So, serotonin is a neurotransmitter that is 95% of it is produced in the gut. It's to help with gut signaling, it's to help with peristalsis, which helps move everything along. It's to help with immune health as well, and general digestive processes. And that's why the majority of it's produced in the gut. And a lot of it still accesses the gut brain axis. The gut brain axis is 80% afferent, meaning that most of the signals that are going between the gut and the brain are going up toward the brain. And so, whatever we eat is in a lot of ways our mental health. And so, our mental health are things like those neurotransmitters, serotonin. So, serotonin is a signaling hormone that goes to the brain and or already is produced in the brain to help alleviate mood disorders. Say, for instance, we wake up in the morning, we get sunlight, right? And when we get that sunlight in our eyes, it helps us. Those photoreceptors in our eyes end up helping the organs in our brain produce um, uh, serotonin or to release it. And so that serotonin then acts to help us alleviate something like anxiety or depression. It's just that general, all-encompassing neurotransmitter that's very, very important for our mental state. And so, on the topic of sex hormones, it can be important to have male hormones like androgens get those proteins to get the serotonin to the brain. And and in a lot of ways, um, women also have male hormones, and so it's a really complex subject to get into. But a lot of women who are propelled into masculine roles in their lives, they may call upon more androgens and may end up more fearless because of it, with less anxiety. So there's a factor of sex hormones that factor into anxiety. But I would say when I first started all this health stuff, I was merely talking about the more of like the root cause in terms of the gut, where there are these fungi that when they digest glucose or carbohydrates turn into glucose, which is sugar, right? So when you think about carbohydrates, I try to tell people in this analogy, uh, the pancake itself can be much worse than the syrup. A lot of people are really focused because of marketing today on sugar, but carbohydrates are sugar, if not double the amount of the sugar. And if you have a gram of carbohydrates, you got 2.3 grams of sugar. So it's going to go much further. It just takes a while to digest, and then eventually you have the problem. So I'd argue that anxiety just gets stalled with carbohydrates. A lot of time people can eat like a whole bunch of ice cream and immediately get anxiety because there's sugar that's ubiquitous, or they can get anxiety as they're just slowly digesting that tortilla they ate down the line. And so, in a lot of ways, anxiety can just completely be traced back to that. Just what you're eating. And so, these yeast that I was mentioning, to go back, they they digest the glucose and it turns into acetaldehyde. And acetaldehyde can make serotonin efficiency very complicated. and in a lot of ways, completely disrupt his performance. And so at that point, people can end up with something like anxiety, and I believe this is a big part of it. A lot of people in the alternative space, again, there's a lot of opinions, uh, believe that, say, EMFs in the atmosphere are very much a big part of anxiety. There is a lot of literature on it that is true, but people have been experiencing anxiety since well before the Spanish flu and so on. Since the first radio waves, and anxiety has been around forever. But these yeasts are timeless. Sugar is timeless. We have always had that, and we've not always eaten well. If you go thousands of years back, there are really not a lot of people who are eating the way they're supposed to be eating. And so anxiety has just been something humanity has known for quite a while, I imagine. And there are other causes too, mineral imbalances and heavy metal toxicity. If you have metals at receptor sites that are filling gaps where the receptor sites are being filled by heavy metals when there's supposed to be minerals there to help our optimal metabolic functioning. And this alone can cause anxiety. Say, for instance, your zinc and copper is out of balance. But this goes right back into endocrine health again, your hormones, the sex hormones. So if you have too much copper, you can end up with more estrogen. And if you have not enough zinc, that's lower testosterone. Zinc is more of your testosterone mineral, and copper is your estrogen mineral. These are supposed to be in a 10-to-1 balance, and so it often gets quite complicated because of that. But generally speaking, a good way for people to look at anxiety and the actual cause, the first thing is to look to sugar. And it's not to blame sugar, it's that the majority of us have taken antibiotics. And so antibiotics can lead to a fallout zone in the gastrointestinal tract that leads to the production of more of those yeasts. On top of our high carbohydrate diets, our body just kind of invites the yeast in a lot of ways because of what we eat. And they opportunistically take up more areas that they normally, because normally they wouldn't be able to, but because of antibiotics, it kind of ensures it. So then we have more what's called gastrointestinal dysbiosis, where there's an imbalance of microbes. And so there are also the microbes who create and support the production of serotonin, and they obviously get destroyed with the antibiotics as well. So then you can have someone who just has anxiety all the time. So yeah, everyone's going to be different, but there are multiple factors involved. And I'll definitely say the sex hormones are a big part of it, but the first thing is always going to be the gastrointestinal health for anxiety.
Look at the food that we are consuming. That's so powerful. It's interesting. I'm working on a book right now, and part of it is on food. And it's interesting just talking about food and how it's been a stress in people's lives for all of time, right? And it's never not been a stress. It's just shifted and changed over the centuries and such. And so I find that really fascinating. And I've never thought about that relationship between anxiety and food and in a historical perspective as well. So, but I am absolutely amazed at just how, I mean, we're just created as these, the body is just so amazing. And just to hear you connect all of these different pieces, it's like, whoa. I mean, I know it's complex, but it's so easy. And I get frustrated with big pharma and, just pop a pill, but all the side effects are worse than what you're trying to like get rid of. And it's not natural to your body when we could easily say, okay, let's go through this other protocol over here that is in line with how our body is created. We're created to heal. We're created to mend. We're not, I mean, like we get cut and we heal. It doesn't like, if we're healthy, it doesn't stay an open wound where it's like, oh, wow, why isn't my skin, regenerating and growing over? Like we're intended to. So I really very much appreciate this approach. You touched on parasites, and I would love to. I actually have some friends, shout out. You're listening to this, you know exactly who you are. They've been researching parasites recently, and they've gone down that rabbit hole. And I'm like, I don't know that I can go down the rabbit hole, but I think that that's something that people are becoming more aware of. Still early adoption phase for the general population, but how are you seeing that play out with your clients?
Oh yeah, that was a really big subject. Uh, I mean, it's a similarly big subject to mold and yeast. They're all causing the same similar issues in the body. They're all opportunistic and all trying to get territory. It's just that parasites are uniquely prolific in their life cycles and how you go about getting rid of them. Where do I start? So generally, a lot of people right now are trending around the whole controversy behind like parasites, being tied to like demons and whatnot, and then kind of like there's like this spirit kind of like gateway in our gastrointestinal tract. And
I haven't heard that one yet, so
okay,
that was my
that
first
one's
time
a
hearing that one.
that is like as far as deep diving in the rabbit hole you can get. And
Okay.
but I will say that from my experience with parasites, they generally try to be somewhat commensal, but they're very dirty operators. So when they do go about being commensal, commensal means like being supportive to your body and not exactly causing problems. Um, they do take more than what they're supposed to. And so they do that by disabling the immune system or either evading it, mostly evading it. There are rare situations where they can actually disable immune cells. But they've grown to be quite intelligent where they can do that and access our nervous system and affect our cravings. There's even speculation where they actually affect our sexual nature and our kind of like the way we think of others on the sexual level. So there's a lot more to be explored. I mean, the microbiology is quite vast, and we don't know more than 5% of it, honestly. And but when it comes to parasites, they're eukaryotic, meaning they have a cell wall and they have a nucleus. They're about at least twice the size of bacteria. Those are prokaryotes, and the parasites are uniquely capable of knowing where to go inside the body to optimally lay their eggs and complete the life cycle and just keep going in perpetuity. A lot of the genera parasites, like some of the parasite genera, don't really last very long, and you just vacate them at some point. But some can stick around for good. Liver flukes might be one of them. These guys really like, obviously, the liver. The reason why they've managed to understand that in the liver there's less immune cell activity. So it's one of our
Interesting.
organs that while we think it's like the powerhouse for getting rid of stuff, it's also one of the best places for a parasite to set up shop and hang out. So
Wow.
yeah, and a lot of people who are against parasites are really big on cleansing the liver. Some of these liver cleanses and gallbladder flushes are very intense. I don't know if you've heard of them, but I've done them before, and sometimes it feels like you're almost at death's door when you're doing them, and it's like, okay, this
Oh,
is too
wow.
intense. Yeah, because you're downing a whole bunch of olive oil. Some people do castor oil, and you're
Oh,
taking a boatload of Epsom salt. It's um, it's really intense, but it does get the job done. I mean, you'll get rid of your gallstones that ever build up in your gallbladder, but it's some kind of last ditch effort for people who have gallbladder pain and they don't want to get surgery. Um, Obviously really complicated. There's even studies that are lining up liver flukes and other parasites within the liver as being somewhat causative to gallstone formation within cows. I haven't really found enough literature with humans, but I imagine it's somewhat of the same because it doesn't make sense to me how many gallstones people create on a regular basis. Um, there's a lot of gallbladder surgeries. I mean, it's definitely up there for most common surgical removal procedure.
oh, wow.
Yeah, I think that between that and the appendix, a lot of people get sections of their colon cut out, like for instance with Crohn's disease and all that. But yeah, it's I really try to help people to understand that they can get those stones out without having to do surgery. This is misinformation. Like I hate using the term misinformation, but it is. Like
Right.
the the conventional space, uh, and a lot of the people I've worked with, like one of them's really hardcore investigator, super angry at the medical industry. So he managed to drudge up some evidence that and this you can't quote me on this one because it was just his thing, and he managed to find evidence on it. And somewhere I was like, what? But he was saying that they were selling gallbladders out of these medical institutions. So like he speculates that there's this whole thing where they're trying to get gallbladders out because it's worth a pretty penny.
Wow.
But who's to say if that's absolutely true or not? But um, yeah, it's kind of I believe it because it's really easy to the science on it is pretty clear. Like you can get gallstones out without surgery. So many people know about it. Like even my mom and her level 2 alternative information, she's gonna absolutely know how to get the gallstones out. Like it's there are all kinds of herbal remedies and practices. Or for me, I dry fast them out. Like that's another thing. People are like, what? Like no one dry fast gallstones. Like I dry fast everything. Not
Yeah, you're like, that's my cure for everything. I'm just gonna drive
yes,
fast.
yes, exactly. Like
Join me
I've
for the
had,
weekend.
yeah, I've had bacterial meningitis. I've had it all. Like I've and there are people I work with who've had an inguinal hernia, people who had a inflamed aorta. These are very serious problems which can lead to surgery. I just
Yeah.
had them fast. I'm like, hey, dry fast 2 days for this, 3 days for that, and it goes away. And the people in here
Wow.
who've gotten their mesh surgeries from their hernias, they're probably thinking I'm absolutely nuts, but I'm telling you, it works. It can work. It just depends on the person and their metabolic means of acquiring sufficiency. So the guy I'd been working with, he's on like a pretty crazy diet. So and I felt pretty certain that a guy like him would be able to recover,
Hmm.
and so it worked out. Yeah,
This
but
is
sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to finish up on parasites. If you want to get rid of parasites, you definitely want to capitalize on the full moon. So coming up here on the 21st until the 31st, I have people go after parasites. I think the full moon will happen on the 24th. They do
What's the
actually have,
correlation? I mean, I
apparently
know that
they
I
do.
don't know all of this well enough. I know that, I mean, the gravitational pull and all sorts of things. I mean, it's amazing how the universe is created.
Yeah, I started noticing when one of the manufacturers that I'd been using, Cellcore, was actually giving credence to using full moon cycles for parasite cleansing. I was like, wow, you guys are. I literally didn't think it was serious at all for a while when people brought it up. I'm like, really, full moon? Like, there's werewolves in my gut? Like,
Right.
so anyway, they just start. I guess they start breeding much more readily during this time, and they're more active. They're also more active every day at night, and so it is just altogether better to start cleansing around this time, that time of the month when the full moon comes out. And you should always hit them very hard. I should never go lightly because there are complications where they start to evade the immune system and they can easily burrow through your tissue into places you don't want them to be. So not good because that's where people speculate cancer can happen, like pancreatic cancer and all that. A lot of people in the alternative health space are fairly certain that microbes are at the root of cancer, particularly the eukaryotes. That's more my take on it when I did a cancer speech locally. I very much feel certain that it's rooted in parasites and fungi. And I think that when people take fenbendazole, it's just an anti-parasite drug. It works for some cancers and not others. One of my friends and their friend, they had an esophageal cancer. And I'm like, why would you take fenbendazole for that? Parasites don't colonize the esophagus, like very few of them ever do. Like you should be taking itraconazole, and this one's anti-mold, anti-yeast drug. And so, I can't, professionally recommend these drugs to them though, but I know that from experience, I've seen people when they go after cancer, they can very much end up breaking down some tumors with these kinds of drugs. The literature is ubiquitous on it. So, yeah.
Wow. Oh my gosh. Okay. We could clearly, I mean, like, I just want to continue the conversation because, and this is why I wanted to have you on the show for, a health episode, because you and I've spoken before, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, there's so much here, and we haven't even scratched the surface. I'm like, golly, you're gonna have to be a recurring guest. Like,
Yeah.
it's exciting, and it's also, although it's a lot of information and it's so complex, but it's so exciting to know that there are people like you who have done the research and the homework and are working within this, outside of the traditional modern medicine world. That it's not traditional, it's modern medicine. And so it's really refreshing, because like you said earlier, there's so many people out there that seem to have the way, that want to point you in. It's not, it's misguided so often, and it's not well researched. So I very much appreciate, your expertise and your time. I will have to have you back on the show if you're ever up for it. So
Sure.
I know that if I were listening to this show, and conscious investor, you might feel the same way, but there's so many other questions I have that it's conscious investor, you might, be thinking to yourself like, oh my gosh, maybe this is my next step. Maybe this is what can help me, with my anxiety, or with so many other things that you might be wrestling with, and this is a gateway. You might have already been going to, the modern medicine doctor, your primary care person, and all of that, and you're getting nowhere. Like, you don't even have to be getting nowhere to say, like, I don't need to go down that path. You just need to say, hey, maybe there's this better option out here that I can go down. And if someone wanted to reach out to you and say, you know what, Asa, I don't want to put a bunch of big pharma in me, and I want to feel amazing. Or, to your point, there are a lot of you conscious investors who are really, really healthy, and you're like, I couldn't be healthier. You're kind of like, who's that guy on Parks and Rec? There's a character that has tons of energy. You know who I'm talking about if you know Parks and Rec, and maybe you're that character, Chris. That's his name, right?
Oh,
And you're just like, I'm so healthy. Well, actually, maybe you could be healthier. What would that look like? So
yeah.
Asa, how can they reach out to you?
Oh, yeah. So, I mean, I'm typically really just mostly available on Facebook. That's where most of my following is. I'm working on being elsewhere. I just have so many. I just have the two big groups on there where I make a lot of content, and I have my main content on my page. If you just Google Asa Santiago, ASASANTIAGO, you can find me at the Survival School at northwestsurvivalschool.com. You can find me at Gut Goals, which is my health site. I am changing the name though legally here pretty soon, so it can be the website will still be available. You'll be able to go to gut-goals.com and find it. It's just expect that the site's going to get an overhaul because they're going to be focusing more on people's identity changes within health. Because I am great with gastrointestinal health, but I'm really focused on helping people with their hormones and becoming optimal within their relationships, and that's where I'm moving my business to. So I'm changing the name and everything, but Gut Goals is what it's called now. It's GUT-GOALS.com. And that's where you can find me there. And my contact information is there. But yes, also at the Northwest Survival School. I'm also here at what's called the Vine Health and Wellness Center in Moscow, Idaho. I practice here physically, and see people one-to-one. If you'd like to come out and get a consult, I do free 15-minute sessions. I also do free 15-minute calls online as well. But yeah, so that's the way to reach me. But definitely follow me on Facebook if you'd like to get my updated with all my relevant information that I talk about in both, the polarity endocrine space and the gastrointestinal health space.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Asa. And conscious investor, your health is the bedrock foundation of being a conscious investor, right? We have to take care of our shell, but not just our shell, but everything within, and our soul and everything. So just make sure that you are taking time to, if you feel drawn, like if you feel a little bit curious, like go down the rabbit hole, because optimum health changes everything in your life. Until next time, remember, adventure belongs on the trail, not in your investing and not in your personal life. And so if you are looking to place your first or next investment, or you're thinking, I want to make some changes in my career, my profession, reach on out. Let's have a conversation. Because remember, if I can't support you, I have the best network in the world, and I will connect you up. I'm not a hoarder. I like to make sure that people are getting served powerfully and as efficiently as possible. So please don't be a stranger. Head on down to the show notes and schedule a time. Until next time, cheers to health, mindset, and wealth.